Okay, hello again and welcome to all those joining us on the recording, watching this again, all those joining us on Facebook Live, and welcome again to all of those joining us on Zoom. You're here with us this evening at the Happier at Work free webinar, and it's really lovely to have so many great people joining us on Zoom Live. And if you're watching on Facebook, you can also be a part of the live discussion. Feel free to comment and share ideas in the chat box. My colleague Morella is monitoring the Facebook, so she can share your comments into our Zoom discussion. Now we're going to kind of fully kick off the webinar. So just to introduce a bit further, this webinar is part of a free series of webinars run by the Network of Wellbeing, and it's all about building wellbeing together, really. So looking at different aspects of wellbeing in our personal lives, in our organisations, in our communities, and also in connection to kind of wider society and the wider world, and really looking at how the connections between those different work in different sectors and how we can kind of learn from each other and support each other to strengthen the wellbeing movement as a whole. This evening that we're focusing on a really important topic, actually, happiness and wellbeing at work, and we're joined by Sherry Clark. Hi, Sherry.
Hi, Chloe. Hi, everybody.
Thanks so much for joining us, Sherry. Sherry is actually really working as a consultant and in this area, but she's got years of experience focusing on happiness and well-being at work and in different contexts, and she's got lots to share, and she's really keen also to have a kind of interactive discussion with you guys. So people that are joining us on Zoom have been sharing a little bit about where they're joining us from and their interest in this topic. I see that Marius has joined. Hi, Marius, so lovely that you're here. He's saying happiness is a part of my Project Beauty initiative. He's preparing a masterclass for Rotterdam University next year, and the topic is really really important to his work at the moment. And Safi has said she decided to join this evening because she always enjoys the webinars. Oh, that's brilliant, Safi, thanks. And she's a chief exec of an organisation and interested in how she can support contributing to creating a workplace that helps everyone's happiness. I think that is a really important point, Safi, and a reason why a lot of people will be joining this evening probably. So just again to share a little briefly about the format for this evening, I'm gonna ask Sherry a few questions, and she's gonna share her take on happiness at work based on her experiences, and then we're gonna have a kind of practical exercise to get you guys thinking about how to put this knowledge that Sherry shares into practice in your own lives, and then we're going to have questions and answers from you guys, but we also want to have an interactive discussion. So if you've got comments or thoughts you want to share throughout, then feel free to just put them in the chat box on Zoom, or if you're watching on Facebook, then put them in the comment box on Facebook, and we will read out and kind of respond to and engage with as many comments as we possibly can. And if you've got specific questions on Zoom, then do put them in the Q&A box and we'll get to them at the end. And on Facebook, just put them in the comments box and my colleague Morella will help out with feeding them into the discussion. So after all of our introductions, Sherry, without further ado, I would like to kind of jump into the topic a bit of happiness at work. So I'm really excited to have this discussion with you. I think that it's something that has become a bit of a kind of hot topic in a way, happiness at work, and it's something that's really discussed a lot, you know, from large boardrooms to kind of really small organizations. How can we create a sense of happiness and well-being in our work? How can we create a sense of meaning? It's really become this kind of big deal. And so the first question really is, why has happiness at work become such a hot topic in this way? And is it really, you know, that much of a big deal? What's your take?
Well, my first answer is really a short one. Yes, it is a big deal. And I think one of the really interesting things about my work is that I do a lot around what's happening right now, you know, practical ways to be happy at work. let's think about this. And I think we often forget to put into context why this is such a hot topic. So it's a great question. Thank you so much. And I think it's worth probably flagging up that there's a combination of factors that are contributing to this, I think, growing interest in happiness at work. And what I use is the phrase emotional experience, our emotional experience at work. And I think one of them is that really what organizations need to succeed in this day and age have changed a lot. I think we've moved really from muscle power to mind power. Organizations no longer need to rely on people's physical strength to manufacture, to make things, but they do need mental strength. They need things like creativity, flexibility, problem solving, innovation, the ability to influence other people, the ability to actually engage interpersonally with people. And those are the kind of skills that actually organizations need to gain a competitive advantage. So one of the things is around the organization's needs changing. The second one is around our needs changing around work. I always think back, not that long ago, to my dad's career. And I think my dad's career was kind of defined by 40 years working for the same company, a very obvious career ladder that had very clear steps of career development. He had 100% job security, pretty much. And he had things like stock options, all of these things that actually have completely disappeared. So, what do we replace those with? How do we actually meet our needs for a fulfilling job when all of those things that actually made jobs worthwhile, and I know, there are a lot of those are quite tangible and quite focused on money and achievement, but what have we got now that replaces those? So we need to be thinking about what our needs are in terms of work. And then the third one is around the science of happiness. And I think, for most of us here today, we're speaking to the converted, I know, but we have, in the last, say, 2 decades, gained an awful lot in terms of really valuable insights around what human flourishing looks like and, the sorts of things that contribute to human flourishing. So we know a lot more now than we ever did around what we can do to craft work in different ways. And then, so as well as those 3 things about the organizational needs, the individual needs, and the science of happiness, I think it's also worth just touching very briefly on, I have a background in mental health, and I think there is no ignoring the fact that on the health and well-being front, what's also happened is, if you look at, for example, sickness absence at work, what you'll find is that historically it was all about musculoskeletal stuff. It was about strains and sprains and that kind of stuff. But what we've got now is we've got a growing and massive challenge around stress-related illnesses, the kinds of things that people are experiencing because of cognitive overload, because of stress, the sorts of things that actually are showing that something is not working in what we're being asked to do in the workplace. So we need to shine. This is I can't stress enough. We need to shine a really, really strong spotlight on emotional experience at work, because the way we feel really affects what we do. So yeah, that's it. That's a long answer to your question, but I think
but it's really helpful to have such a thorough answer as well of like the different aspects, because like you say, it's very multifaceted. There is the kind of organizational, structural reasons why, that our priorities at work have kind of shifted, and within that kind of happiness and well-being is becoming a greater issue, in part because of these large challenges that you've also highlighted around, the stresses and the increasing risk of things like burnout and mental health challenges at work. I wonder, for those listening, whether out of those points that Sherry's shared, whether there's any particular area that kind of really resonates with you in your own life. So are you really focused on kind of the organizational? Are you more focused on the kind of personal aspects? Are you really interested in the science of happiness? Or actually, if you if you would like to share, do you feel quite vulnerable in terms of stress and kind of risk of burnout in your working situation? If any of those are kind of really resonating with you, or you'd like to, hear more about any particular area, then feel free to share in the chat. And we'll move on to the next question that I had for Sherry. Like you mentioned, some of these people, lovely people listening into the webinar this evening, maybe they are well versed in some of the kind of positive psychologies, the science of happiness, the increasing evidence that is behind a lot of the reasons why happiness at work has become such a big deal. But what do you find are the kind of common challenges that you face, or that people can face when trying to maybe engage others in thinking about the importance of happiness and well-being at work? So if you're talking to people, organizations, leaders in different sectors, what are the kind of challenges that you might come across, and how would you suggest kind of tackling or overcoming those?
Well, I think there's a couple of things, Flo, and I appreciate what people are feeding through the chat, because I think it's really helping inform what I'm going to talk about a little bit more, and also maybe in the Q&A. But in terms of the challenges, I think going back to what I said about preaching to the converted, in some ways people have come into the webinar because they're interested in this area. And we have, and I see in my work in a day-to-day way, a lot of organizations and a lot of people, particularly in senior leadership areas, very interested in this, and really wanting to kind of engage and get involved and do something. But I think there are probably two significant areas that I think we need to, as practitioners, as people in workplaces, think about, and that will help us understand a little bit more about how to move things forward. The first one is that when we talk about happiness, we are, in some ways, I'm vexed and bugged a lot by this, but you get a lot of stories like the kind of mythology around Google with it's not mythology, but sleep pods, pool tables, the slide down the middle of the room. And you see these pictures around all these amazing whizzy things and all these tricks that organizations are doing. And what that does in some ways is, I'm going to help surface, some of the things around you can't have fun at work. It's not supposed to be a daily grind. But what it also ignores is it ignores the other side of the coin about happiness. And the other side of that coin is what, those of us who are kind of in the trade talk about in terms of the difference between hedonic, the pleasure-based happiness, and eudaimonic, the meaning-based happiness. And that actually what we know from what we're learning around work is that the hit we get from the meaning and purpose in our work, feeling that we're contributing to something that's making a difference to people, being valued for doing something that plays to our strengths, feeling a sense of pride and accomplishment working for an organization that does something that's sort of bigger than just getting something out, is a massive, massive contributor to our happiness at work. And I think the conversations often focus on the pleasure stuff. And I have a client that I worked with last year who, after numerous conversations around measuring happiness at work, decided to go out and buy everybody in the office stand-up desks, because they had heard that, sitting down and staring at a screen is very bad for your health. What they hadn't clocked was that actually what was happening in the organization was people had really lost their way. There was a massive amount of change within the organization, a massive amount of complexity in the work that they were doing, but this kind of linear mindset that we have around here's the problem and this is what's going to fix it is very much around the tangible, I call them perks. So I think we need to kind of understand the difference between the pleasure that you get from work, which is, I mean, not underestimating it. We should get together for a drink with our buddies and stuff. And but we also have to think about how people find meaning in their work. And then the second aspect of this is particularly around the question that I always get, which is, okay, you know, I know it's really important, but I'm looking at this overwhelming landscape that you're talking about happiness in, and you're talking about things about accomplishment, you're talking about things about pleasure, you're talking about things about pride, hope, ambition, all these different things. Where's the best place to invest? And I think one of the things that I'm just really quickly going to draw here, if I can, is I think it's very useful to, I draw on Stephen Covey's work around the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, because I think it is really relevant to what we talk about. So Covey talks about our circle of concern and our circle of influence. And for those who don't know, our circle of concern, I don't know if people can see that. Our circle of concern is all the things we think about. And it's massive. You know, when you think about happiness at work, you think about our experience at work, it's massive. At everything from our bosses to our colleagues, to the work we do, to the demands we have, to where our desk is in relation to the guy that we can't stand or the guy that we really like. All of those things contribute. But there's a circle of influence here in the middle, which is where we can make a difference. And what we need to think about and make time to think about is what's in that circle of influence. Where can we invest some of our time and energy? So that's what I really want people to kind of think about for themselves. I can't give you an answer. I can't tell you what's in your circle of influence. But if you start to think about it, you'll come up with a whole bunch of things that where you can affect change. You might not be able to change the whole organization in terms of what everybody gets paid, but you might be able to change the way somebody next to you feels about what's going on. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I think what you say about starting the discussion from a different point, so focusing on the, you know, on the deeper topics of meaning and purpose, and the more eudaimonic sides of what work can mean to us, rather than the hedonic side, is starting the discussion from a new point, and then within that being really kind of specific and practical. So what can you have an influence on? You know, there are, of course it's a huge area, and of course there are so many things that we would like to change, but what is it possible to start changing and start moving towards? And I think thank you for that really helpful reply. And people have been sharing a bit in the chat in relation to what you shared to the last answer about why is happiness at work so important. And Lisa said, as someone with a hidden disability and who works with people with similar disabilities, I'm interested in learning more about how to cope with sensory overload. I think that's a really important comment, Lisa, and I think that's definitely a huge sensory overload is definitely a huge issue in the workplace today, I think. Marius has said Project Beauty started out as an individual initiative, but in the survey we have one work-related question. Does the work you do or the job you have add anything to the beauty in your life, or does it detract from that beauty? I think that's a very powerful question, because yeah, it really makes you reflect. I mean, work is, of course, where we spend a lot of our waking hours. And yeah, unfortunately, I think the reason, reflecting back to the first question, one of the reasons this has become such an issue and topic to talk about is because a lot of people don't feel that connection to beauty or happiness or positive emotions, like you're saying, Sherry, in the workplace. Emma's shared a question that we're going to address later in the Q&A section. And then Judy has said she loves hearing about the so-called perks that places like Google have and how much they work or not. I wonder how much analysis is done. Yeah, I think, you know, I think that, yeah, maybe this is something you could touch on a bit more, we could share in the follow-up. We know this is a huge topic and there's so much research and resources around this, actually. And actually, I think some of the research is pointing to the fact that, you know, the deeper emotional sides of kind of creating meaning and fulfilling work can have much more impact than the kind of perk-based stuff. I think that's what I understand that you're saying, Sherry. So we can go into that in a bit more detail if we have time, and or share resources in follow-up. I wanted to also ask about you know, you've shared some of this, the framework for how we can think about this topic, what some of the key issues are, although of course there are lots more. But what do you think that we can do to be happier at work? So are there kind of practical tools or tips that that you use in your work, or that you've come across, that you would suggest that people try, that you'd like to share?
Yeah. I just want to stop for a second and just say how much I appreciate what's going on in the chat box, because I think we're in a conversation that actually is flagging up a huge amount of people's experience. Very common. I picked up the comment about the toxic workplace. And I think, I can't put too much emphasis on this, that, we talk a lot about the workplace as healthy or unhealthy. And I know that many, many people are feeling that they're exposed to very, very toxic systems, environments, and we need to, partly maintain our own well-being as best we can in those situations, knowing full well that actually we are in a difficult situation, and also do as much as we can to actually affect change. So I think there's two things going on. So when we're thinking about the practicalities, I think that the one thing that I think we all really, really need to reflect on is that we have a finite amount of energy. And I am an absolute advocate of Tony Schwartz's work around, he has an organization called the Energy Project. And he talks a lot about the fact that we need to manage our energy, not our time. We talk about what it's like to figure out ways to do more with less. We have to understand that we have finite amounts of energy. We have 168 hours in our week. And we can spend it in lots of different ways, but we have a finite amount of energy. We have physical energy. I'm really sorry about this. I had thought
Speaking of finite amounts of energy, you've got multiple commitments.
Attention.
No worries.
We have physical energy that is renewable. And that's renewed by sleep. It's renewed by relaxation. We have emotional energy that is all about our feelings. And if we can step away from the high arousal feelings and again create feelings of contentment, of pride, those things that are lower arousal feelings, and understand the difference between the two, creating habits of happiness in this area is really helpful. The third one is the cognitive, the renewal energy about cognitive energy, how much we learn, how much we know. We have demands on our cognitive energy constantly. And actually, if you look at some of the most successful people in organizations right now, they're spending half a day a week reading and listening to other people. They're pressing the pause button and going, I need some time to think. What's going on here? And the last one around the renewable energy that Schwartz talks about that I think is so persuasive is the spiritual energy. How we renew for ourselves and for other people that sense of purpose and meaning. And that's really much more about crafting within the context of your job. It may be a very toxic environment, but there will be things that you can do once you step back a little bit and say, okay, how do I renew my energy? It may literally be that you step out of the room. You step out of the office for 5 minutes, you go outside and you get a breath of fresh air. But we have to really think about this in terms of our energy, because there's no way that we can, and I use this loosely, fix or make happy an unhappy environment when our energy is already depleted. So that's the first thing, is around renewing our energy. The second one is that I work a lot with Nick Marks, and some of you will know Nick's work around the Happy Planet Index and the original Happiness at Work survey. And he now has an organization called Friday. And the original 5 Ways to Happiness were part of his work at the New Economics Foundation. He's moved that on. And so there are now 5 ways that he's working on around well-being at work. And I'm just going to hold them up because I scribbled them down earlier. To give you just a quick summary, again, these are the things that are actually the characteristics of happy workplaces. But they're also the things that we need to understand and the lens through which we can look at our workplaces to try and create happier spaces. So obviously the first one is connection. You know, how do we connect with people? And there's some great stuff around spend and send when you're thinking about connections. Spend time with people who energize you. Send emails and texts to people who drain you. Think about the difference between the two. The second one is be fair. The one around fairness I think is really interesting, because fairness really is not something we think about unless it's not there. It's when things are unfair that our happiness really takes a hit. So move away from kind of thinking, okay, this is really unfair, and go, okay, where would things look fairer? How would things look fairer? What would happen? The third one is empower. And that's not just around the organization empowering you to do better work, but it's actually about your sense of empowerment. How much do you feel like, how much in control are you? How much control do you have over your work? Do you have over your relationship with others? Think about those sorts of things in terms of your own sense of feeling like you have power over what you do. The third one is challenge. And this really comes from Csikszentmihalyi's work around flow and understanding the degree to which well-being is enhanced by being really, really involved in something that is a great balance of your strengths, and it's not too tough. You've got the skills and it's stretched a little bit, but not too much. So challenge. It's also about feedback. You know, how much feedback do we get, and what's the quality of the feedback that helps us to be better in the workplace? And the last one is inspire. And in terms of inspire, this takes many, many different shapes. And I think I just want to share a very quick story, if that's okay. Do we have time? I think a lot of the conversations I have around the 5 ways to well-being at work focuses on what you were saying earlier, on the structural issues. And I work with a client in the States that actually, the example of the inspiration has come through this week, and it's been so awe-inspiring from our perspective that I wanted to share it. The founder of the organization, who has been historically a very closed, very I'm sure she's very emotional, but doesn't show it within the workplace. It's very task-oriented. This is what we do. It's very high-tech industry. Last week was doing a happiness at work survey and was wanting to encourage her colleagues to do more in terms of filling in the survey. And she sent an email to the whole organization saying, just want to let you know that I've had an amazing week. And she told the story that she had had a few days off, and that what she had been doing was scattering the ashes of her father. And her family had rented a boat and gone out into the ocean. And when they took her father's ashes out, they saw in the distance a whale. And then they saw 4 or 5 whales. And she had taken some hydrangeas from her garden to put as they scattered the ashes, and she attached the photographs of the whales in the sea and the hydrangeas, which had tipped over and they were kind of stalk up. So she put this little story about her experience, her very powerful experience of her and her family scattering her father's ashes, and these photos, and saying, one of the quotes that had really resonated with her was, "It isn't the life in your years, it's the years in your life." It's the other way around. You know what I mean. And she sent this around to the organization, and she's been trying for months and months and months to get people to change the way they interact with each other. And she sent this email out, and the interaction as a result of this email has been astronomical. And I kind of, speeded the story up and haven't done it very well, but I think it's an amazing example of how inspiration works. And I think probably over time that we will see just incredible changes within an organization because of a random act of leadership being open, being willing to share, and expressing emotions in a way that we don't usually in a workplace. And I think those kinds of things build incredible trust. So yeah, sorry for going on about this.
No, not at all. It's a really I'm really grateful that you shared it. Actually, I think it's a really powerful story that shows a lot about kind of being your whole self in the workplace. And yeah, Marius is also saying wonderful story, Sherry. I think it's in a way it's those stories and those like personal insights and that ability to just be a bit vulnerable and to share something really honestly, openly, emotionally, and show the whole person rather than just an employee or an employer, that really strengthens relationships at work. And yeah, it kind of it indirectly improves your workplace, of course, but that's not the only intention. And actually it's really a kind of holistic intention. In a sense, it can improve your workplace, but it also just improves your your life to be able to have that closer, more open relationship with colleagues. And yeah, I think it's really powerful.
Those moments that really lift our spirits are the things that connect us and actually build that foundation, as somebody's just written, around safe spaces.
Yeah.
Yourself. I think that's really important.
Yeah, for sure. And just to very briefly share, it's not the same, but one thing that we do in the Network of Wellbeing team that I find really helps us to connect with each other and see each other as whole people is that in our team meetings we share kind of golden nuggets. So something beautiful that has happened to us in the past few weeks, and it could be anything from spending time with your child to going on a trip to just it could be anything. And but it just helps to see your colleagues in a different light and to really connect on a person to person level and not everything be focused on kind of productivity and outputs. And yeah, so I think and I think that actually it's a funny thing that once you build up that sense of connection, then the productivity and outputs can go up. But that's not the intention. It's also just to have that connection. Like you say, it's interesting that connect is in the 5 ways to wellbeing, the original 5 ways to wellbeing research, and also in these new 5 ways to wellbeing at work. So thank you for sharing those. And we can send around links to people that want to look into some of these pieces of research or these tools further. So I'm just a bit aware of time, and we want to have time for you guys to ask some questions as well. But we also just wanted to take the opportunity to pause for a few minutes and just reflect on some of the things that have been discussed and shared so far, reflect on maybe how that relates to our own lives and workplaces. And I'm just going to hand over to Sherry for a few minutes to kind of guide a bit of a practical exercise for us around that intention of pausing.
Thanks, Flo. We've just got a couple of minutes, so I'm going to cut short what I was planning to do, but I think this is a takeaway. And for some of us who are actually, in this already, this will be very familiar, but I'd like us just to take a moment, and Flo, if you could time it for like a full minute, to savor a positive experience in your workplace. So I want you to just think back the last couple of weeks on something that made you feel particularly positive in a work context. So just take a minute to reflect on that. And you may want to jot down some notes, just really in as much detail to just reflect on that experience, what it involved, what it felt like, who was involved, those sorts of things. So as much as possible, and I'll stop speaking now and just let us have a minute. So can you let us know when the minute's up, Flo?
Yeah, I'll start the timer now, and just to also say, if you want to share reflections afterwards in the chat, that's also welcome. But we'll just have a minute's pause now just to give time for that reflection. Okay, that was a minute. Would you like to say anything to kind of round up the...
Yeah, it would be interesting to just get, I don't know whether anyone's got any feedback just really quickly on the experience of savoring a positive experience at work. If you could just put it in the chat, that would be great. What did it feel like? What was it like to be silent for a minute? I think one of the things that I think is really a challenge for us these days is to actually stop, to press pause at work. And we very rarely, I think, even in workplaces that are quite enlightened thinking about happiness, give people time to focus on what goes well. We spend an awful lot of our time and energy trying to fix what's broken. And I think one of the things that we all are, growing in awareness of is that this negativity bias that we have that constantly takes us back to, the threats, the worries, the concerns, means that we're not learning anywhere near as much as we should about what goes well and when it goes well and why. And I think if you can do one thing in a workplace, aside from savoring what goes well, because it's so rare that we get a chance to do it, it is actually keeping track of this on a weekly basis. It's the equivalent of a gratitude diary for the workplace. 3 things at the end of the week that when you look back went well, what happened and why. And you start to build up a picture, you see the trends, you see the contributing factors to what sorts of things we all need to be doing more of and how we can craft a more positive environment for us all to be working in.
Yeah, I think that's really a valuable invitation. And actually, I was using the minute myself just to reflect on how much I appreciate these kind of discussions as part of the Network of Wellbeing's work, and how much I really value the many contributions that we get in the chat, the active participation that we get from people that attend regularly, and that it really means a lot to me, in my role at the Network of Wellbeing, to see people engaging in that way and contributing in that way. So yeah, it made me feel very grateful for this experience, actually. So thank you, Sherry, and everyone. Safi's said savouring is really important. Is a really important thing to do for me. It was lovely to reflect on a session I had been part of with colleagues a few weeks ago. I thought it was exactly like a gratitude journal. Yeah, I think it's a really nice, like you say, it's a really actually practical practice to have a work gratitude journal and see, okay, what's going well and how can I build on that. It's not something, it's actually a takeaway for me from this that I will build into my work practices more. Sandra is saying I had a beautiful day with a colleague. She asked me about my life and I told her about my private life. It was so open and fun, and she introduced me to her job. I really liked myself in that situation because she was open and generous. Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing, Sandra. So now feel free to share more in the chat box if you like, reflections on your experience of savouring positive experiences at work, or also those joining us on Facebook if you'd like to share in the comments. Now we're going to move on for 10 minutes or so, 10 or 15 minutes, to the questions that you guys have been putting in the Q&A box. So I see that we've got some questions there already. If you've got further questions, then do put them in there and we'll try and get through as many as we can. And again, for those joining on Facebook, if you have a question, you can put it in the chat box and the comments section, and my colleague Mirella will feed it into us here in Zoom. So David, actually, first of all, I just wanted to go back. You have touched on it already, but I know that there was a kind of comment about toxic workplaces that was in a way framed as a question. So Emma asked, she'd be interested to know how you define a toxic workplace and what would be the best way to cope with working in a toxic workplace. So I know you've touched on that, but it would be great to hear if you've got any further response to Emma's comment / question there.
I think, I think probably on reflection, I've used that word a lot in my own working life. And one of the things that I think is useful to think about is that if you consider a workplace a toxic workplace, you have to kind of define yourself what that means. Because in a lot of workplaces, some of the things that some people will find very, very damaging and very difficult to deal with are things that actually energize other people. And that you have, you know, this amazing, rich diversity of experiences. And if it's, you know, if it's something that you're describing as toxic because it is very clearly a bullying, fear-oriented environment, then there are, you know, there are ways to actually, or there should be very clear ways to actually report that and deal with that. Yeah. So I think we need to kind of think about whether they are individual responses to things that are going on that are particularly relevant to you as or whether there are things that are structural, or they're team interactions. And actually, the more, once again, going back to that circle of concern, circle of influence, looking at what it looks like to actually affect some change in some of that area to make that sense of it being toxic more positive for you.
Yeah. Thanks, Sherry. And David Green has, hi David, has asked, is happiness really the best term for what we're talking about? Sorry, leading question, but hopefully still relevant.
No, it's not a leading question at all, because it's one that I've battled with for 15 years doing this work. I always have chosen to use the word happiness when I've been told it's not happiness, it's about subjective well-being, or it's about emotional responses, whatever it happens to be. I'm simply reflecting on my own experience here, which is that people understand what I'm talking about when I start to have the conversation. It is a richer, deeper thing than, as I said earlier, having fun or pleasure. I think it's a disputed concept, and it's going to become increasingly more disputed. So the terminology is always a challenge. And I think in anything like this, there will be people who say it isn't this, it's something else. And I guess I go back to the phrase that I use most of all, which is our emotional experience at work, and our positive emotional experience at work, which for me encompasses a whole range of positive emotions.
Yeah, thank you, Sherry. I think it's a topic that we often kind of discuss or consider as well. The distinctions between happiness and well-being, and how to frame things. But I think that you've explained well how you deal with that tension. Wes is asking, does Sherry have any experience of organisations which have taken a decision to engage with employer-supported volunteering and local communities? I wonder whether such external engagement can create safe spaces where our needs can be fulfilled, interpersonal abilities developed, and leadership's emotional capacity explored.
Okay, Wes, you know the answer. That's great. You won't know, but historically I worked for the National Center for Volunteering, so this is a question that's very near and dear to my heart. I know, and could probably stay on for another 2.5 hours giving you examples of where employee volunteering is taking place. It is, an integral part of a lot of corporate social responsibility programs right now. It's a significant contributing factor to well-being at work. I think there's no underestimating the value of volunteering more generally for well-being, but also, as you said, for developing leadership skills, for actually interacting with the community, for giving particularly a very much improved sense of what it's like to live in the local community that you work in. I think often you get a distance or a disconnect between the organizations and the local people who live there and work there. And I think employee volunteering and employee volunteering programs can do an amazing amount to bridge and create what I call linking, what the literature calls linking social capital. So a cross power divide. So you may do something that brings people who are unemployed together with those of you who are employed. Mentoring projects is umpteen zillion volunteer mentoring programs. Those sorts of things have a really fundamental positive impact, and it's 360. It's for everybody who's involved. So yeah, great question. Thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks, Sherry, and thanks, Wes. And Judy Thompson is asking, if someone has mental health issues and is unfortunate enough to work for an unsupportive workplace, realistically, is their only option to leave that company and look for something else? Judy says she's used to having these conversations about companies that are supportive and interested in things like happiness at work, but I don't think there's anything that can be done when businesses aren't interested in that way.
I think, again, thank you. These are great questions. I think there's, there's an awful lot of, I've lost the question there, but there's an awful lot that can be done within the context of an organization. I don't know whether Judy's in the UK or not, but there are mandatory requirements to support people with mental health problems within the workplace. And I think that there are a lot of resources, and I'm a little bit hesitant to kind of signpost people to resources because I know what it's like to be in a situation when you have a mental health problem and the organization is not supportive. But I think there are, we have a Disability Discrimination Act that is a legal requirement to support people. We have organizations like Mind, and particularly Mindful Employer, a fantastic resource. And many organizations in the UK are signed up to the charter to support people with mental health problems at work. In practical terms, immediately it really is your responsibility as an individual to make sure that your manager, who has a duty of care, understands what's going on for you. And there will be many organizations who are not paying enough attention to this right now. I think this is, much as I hate to say this, having worked in mental health for 25 years, we're still pushing a big rock up a steep hill. But I think, if we can also say, look, this is what's going on here, and this is what we need in terms of support, it makes a big difference. I think a lot of it is fear-based. A lot of people withdraw and kind of don't want to talk about it because it's too awkward. But I think the more we can bring it up, the more it reduces the taboo around talking about these things.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. And Wes has said, thank you, Sherry, for your response to his last question. The last question that we have, and then we'll move on towards some announcements that we have before closing. Rakafet, I hope that I've pronounced your name correctly there, Rakafet Cohen, has asked, how can I be happy in work, kind of beyond doing things like gratitude practices and good things? So in a way, this is what the topic of our discussion has been about, and we know we've tried to, Sherry and I talked beforehand about, this is a huge topic to try and cover and explore in 1 hour, and we realized that we can only start to introduce some of the key areas and issues, and we wish, of course, we could go into like lots more depth about all of them, but I think that I feel that you've shared some really valuable tools, Sherry. But is there any in particular that you'd like to kind of recap on or emphasize in response to that question?
Well, again, I think this is a really important question that really highlights this. Is there something that you can do? And I think not after doing 3 good things in the gratitude practices. Those are particular things that you can start to incorporate into your workplace. They're not, as I said earlier, silver bullets. You start to practice gratitude, it will have a ripple effect, but that's not going to make your life substantially different if you're in a difficult or toxic workplace. I think that the only way you can be happy in a work is to think about what makes you happy at work, and really start to spend some time going, is this meaningful to me? Is this something that I want to spend 1/3 of my life doing, because that's how much time we spend at the moment. I think it's also worth thinking that if you look ahead, we are going to live a lot longer, so we are going to be working a lot longer. What is it that we can do within the context of, a changing world of work, which means you're not going to get an ideal job. None of us are going to be able to pick and choose what we do and say, oh yes, I'm going to go and do that for the rest of my life, because chances are in 5 minutes time that job's going to be gone. It's actually understanding within that context that I bring something to the table and I have an emotional experience when I bring that to the table, and it can be good or bad or mediocre or somewhere in between. I need to understand a lot more about what that is. And the more we understand ourselves and the more we understand the things that we can do more of that give us that little extra burst of positive emotions, the more we are going to be happy at work. But I would not, and I send a health warning out to everyone. I work in this business, but there is no magic bullet.
Yeah.
We have to start thinking about what we can do, what we bring to the table, and then how we can change things and build well-being together, as you guys are so good at doing.
Yeah. Oh, thanks, Sherry. That's a beautiful note to draw to a close on, actually. So thank you for that answer. So just to, in the final few minutes, I just want to take some time to share some announcements about ways that you can find out more and stay connected and stay involved. So Sherry, I'll give to you first to share your few follow-ups.
Okay, yeah, just really quickly, we will follow up with a couple of things, but if anybody wants some of the resources I've mentioned, just get in touch with Flo, I guess, through the Network of Wellbeing. I wanted to mention also that going back to the 5 ways at work, Nick Marks' organization Friday, which is friday.work, does a free online happiness at work survey, which up to 5 people can do. You can just sign up and actually do a happiness at work survey, it's great. It's really an interesting feedback around what makes people happy at work. And then I would invite you to make a commitment to do one thing to improve your happiness at work and to improve the happiness of the people that you work most closely with. It doesn't need to be a massive thing, but just to invite you to think about one thing you can do that might change your experience at work in the next week.
Yeah, thank you, Sherry, for that invitation. I think just to say, Sandra's commented, if you can email the books and links to what you've been talking about, that would be great. So Sherry has actually got a list of the most useful resources that she's referred back to in her work, and she kindly said that she can email that, but what I'll do is I'll include an invitation to you guys in the follow-up email, those on Zoom. If you would like that list, then just drop me an email in response to the follow-up email that I'll send in the coming days, and I'll forward on the list from Sherry. For those watching on Facebook or watching the recording, then just get in touch with the Network of Wellbeing on Facebook in the Messenger, or via my email, florence@networkofwellbeing.org, and then we can send over the list to you. You're welcome, Sandra. And then just a few other very short announcements before we close. Sherry is a multi-talented woman, and as well as being really passionate about happiness and well-being at work, she's very creative, and she is going to support and facilitate a Happiness is Handmade weekend course together with the Network of Wellbeing at Eden Rise, which is a venue in the Devon countryside, a really beautiful venue. That's going to be from the 19th to the 21st of October. So if you'd love to have a weekend away in October and spend some time thinking about the topic of creativity and how that connects with our happiness and well-being, then I'll include the link about that in the follow-up email, and anyone interested can find out more via the Network of Wellbeing. And just to let you guys know, we will continue this monthly webinar series. Generally, we're on the last Tuesday of the month. last Tuesday evening of the month. Next month, on Tuesday the 25th of September, at the same time, we're going to be speaking with Duncan Fraser, who's the director of the Mindful Leadership Foundation and the project director of Useful and Kind Unlimited. And we're going to be talking about how can we be useful and kind to ourselves, to others, and to the wider world, and getting the balance between those three areas. So please, you're welcome to join us next month if you would like to. Again, I'll include all these links in the follow-up email. And for those that are joining us on Facebook, just watch out for the links on our page. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining, for giving all of your amazing comments and contributions. It's been so appreciated. And thank you so much to Sherry for being such an amazing guest and for sharing so much wisdom.
Thank you. Thanks to everybody for the comments and the questions as well. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, and thanks, thanks all your kind messages coming in saying thank you. I'm gonna sign off now, so bye everyone.